Kazuya was a loner who found himself in isekai, transported to another realm following a grim mishap. In this unfamiliar dimension, 7 deities gifted him an exclusive advancement system, turning him vastly powerful in his new land. One afternoon, while heading home, he noticed people darting out of a shop in terror. 2 young women stumbled near him, and a mugger wielding a blade lunged at them. Rather than fleeing, Kazuya tackled the attacker, instructing the girls to escape. He was stabbed in his abdomen, and the crook bolted. As he bled, Kazuya felt satisfaction that he rescued the girls in his meaningless existence, but was upset for causing them distress. His sight blurred, and after regaining consciousness, he was lying in a strange chamber. A maid addressed him as Kane and began weeping, shouting for his mother. Omami embraced him and asked if he recognized her. Kane felt perplexed until glimpsing his reflection in a mirror and realizing he was a youngster. After lying comatose for a week, the servant believed his sickness had stolen his recollection. Kane's mother told the maid, Sylvia, to prepare him some broth. Left alone, Kane pondered how he reverted to childhood. He speculated he could be inside an anime or another universe story. He rummaged through his chamber searching for mighty gear but found nothing. He checked to see if he had his massive staff. Sylvia mistook his awkwardness for having wet himself, leaving Kane flustered about the loss. As soon as Sylvia left, Kane pieced together his new persona. He was Kane von Silford, a toddler of 3, with parents named Garm and Sarah, a sibling Riani, and 2 elder half-brothers from his father's second spouse, Maria. His father was refined and also a high-status margrave defending the kingdom from monsters. Thrilled by the idea of beasts and heroes, Kane eagerly wanted to study magic. Sylvia pledged to instruct him in sorcery once he learned to read, prompting him to practice right away. Kane opted to remain in this life, having felt alone previously after losing his family. During dinner, Garm was amazed his child could write, and Riani mentioned he excelled at arithmetic. Sarah believed Kane to be exceptionally gifted. Kane, remaining modest, hailed Sylvia as the finest servant of all, which made his parents wary. They questioned his sudden passion for learning. Sylvia commented about giving him milk from his mother's chest, prompting Garm to wish he had watched. Kane claimed he only wanted to discover all about the world to become an adventurer. Garm, impressed by his excitement, allowed him access to his magic tomes but reminded him he couldn't officially use spells until his baptism at 5. His mother consented, believing he wouldn't manage earlier. Yet Kane secretly started training magic. He learned he could truly wield spells, which excited any anime fan. One evening, while attempting a new trick, he scorched his hands and briefly lost control, but felt thrilled by his new abilities. Riani sneaked into his chambers and confessed she was aware of his winding studies. Kane found relief she didn't fully sense his real capacity. Riani began teaching him more of the outside lands and the legendary first hero, Yuya, who established their realm. Kane was anxious for his baptism. The important day arrived, he dressed in fresh attire, and his relatives praised his appearance. They crossed town in carriages drawn by horses, and Kane gaped at the old-fashioned vistas. Curious about holy gifts, he asked Riani to display her status screen. Amazed by her attributes, he noticed a corrupted status. Rioni swiftly asked him to forget it, and Kane feigned cluelessness. Garm, meanwhile, explained that godly protections came in 5 tiers. Each supernatural blessing ranked between levels 1 and 5, defining expertise in a certain field. At church, the cleric commenced the naming ritual. Without warning, radiant illumination enveloped Kane, and he was shifted to a separate domain where he encountered the 7 gods. They called him by his birth name, Kazuya, and he wondered about the strange Santa Claus figure. Xenom, deity of beginnings, introduced himself, resembling Santa. Xenom could hear his inner thoughts. They talked over Kazuya's futile sacrifice, since the authorities would have caught the criminal in the end. The deities explained they resurrected Kane since he passed away performing a noble act, even if it was unnecessary. Still, Cain didn't regret it, since now he belonged to a warm family, could wield magic, and had the chance for a harem like every other isekai hero. The deities then endowed him with powers. Reno, the magic god, granted magical shelter. Xenom, the creator god, gave his shield. The war god made him a mighty combatant. The technology god elevated his knowledge. The god of trade gave him the power to evaluate items in a storage box, and the earth god bestowed the ultimate skill to handle property. Xenom clarified that Cain's status menu would show all these grants. After some amusement, they returned him to his world. The priest gawked at the radiant idols and asked to view Cain's status menu. Feeling queasy, Cain dashed to the washroom to examine it alone. He discovered all of his blessings were maxed at level 10, twice the usual top ranking. Recognizing the need for secrecy, he used a hidden feature called status concealment to mask his actual strength. That night at supper, Cain joined his kin in celebrating his birthday. Garm asked to finally witness his skill menu. Cain complied and revealed it to everyone. They were astonished to see all 7 deities had blessed him and his magic ability exceeded 340,000. At merely 5, he surpassed nearly all archmages. His father was shocked and demanded Cain swear to keep his abilities hidden. Cain hesitantly agreed and withdrew to his quarters. There he noticed a manual about summoning spells. In the absence of Sylvia, he attempted his first invocation, hoping to obtain a cute pet for his garden. Activating the summoning seal, instead of a charming beast, a towering, hideous monster arrived. His sister and Parma screamed in fright. Tane recalled a similar scenario in the past, but this time swore it would turn out differently. He rushed the monster, but it battered him fiercely, sending waves of pain. Despite the torment, Cain vowed not to let his dear ones grieve again. Channeling all his strength, Cain unleashed a potent spell to banish the creature. Collapsed on the earth, he caught sight of the soft cat ears he'd wished for and longed to pet them. He regretted inciting terror and feared for his survival. After a while, he awoke realizing he was still alive. Now, his loved ones were unharmed and calm. Cain realized his abilities genuinely allowed him to guard and help others here. On his birthday, Cain's father interrogated him about his dreams. Cain unhesitatingly declared he aimed to build a harem. He meant to journey around and aid many, becoming an adventurer and keeping people happy. Moved by his resolve, Garm pledged to employ a guide for him. Alone, Cain speculated what his mentor would be like, but upon her arrival, he got so overjoyed he accidentally teleported outdoors and landed awkwardly. He apologized at once, and the butler introduced Cain's 2 teachers, Millie and Nina. Inside the mansion, Millie blushed over earlier events, while Cain noticed Nina was an elf. Garm told them to relax around him, and Cain asked they address him as a peer. Millie eagerly started the instruction, and lessons began in the training hall. Cain's swordplay stunned Millie. For evaluation, Millie suggested sparring. Cain charged at her, and she barely blocked his blows. Nina questioned if he had the favor of the battle god. Cain admitted he was supposed to conceal it. Weary, Millie requested Nina offer Cain a magic lesson before he ruined her dignity. Nina said her magic blessing was at tier 3, yet Cain had already mastered the basics. He showcased his control over all elements, piercing rock targets with ease. Cain also confessed he had magical god protection. Basically, the instructors felt useless. Millie fretted they had nothing left to teach. Producing a cloth from his storage box astonished them further. Cain offered to practice outside to avoid damaging the house. He had never left the estate, so Millie and Nina agreed it was time to show him the outside world. They told Garm that Cain's skills were too much for the mansion to withstand, which made Garm nervous about his son's prowess. He had foretold such a day but hoped it would come later. Ultimately, Garm allowed Cain to venture out under the strict rule never to wander into the woods. Cain assented and left home with his tutors. Nina opened Kane's magic training by asking for a demonstration of intermediate spells. Kane swiftly prepared a fire spell and sent it at a stone, blowing a crater and toppling both guides. They asked if expending so much power exhausted him, but Kane simply laughed, entirely unfazed. Suddenly, Millie detected foes in the distance. A rabbit burst out of the undergrowth, lunging at Millie, who missed her strike. It lashed out at Kane, but he dodged and finished it with wind bullets. Millie asked if he'd sell the loot, but Kane wanted to show his family, so he packed it away in his item box. Billy was incredulous as she'd saved for years to acquire such a magical pouch. A less impressive form of Kane's storage box. Meanwhile, Nina invoked her seeking ability to detect creatures within 300 meters. Kane was impressed and mimicked her spell, instantly locating for rabbits nearby. Nina marveled that he could even tally them. They sprinted after the prey, and at this moment Millie urged Nina to concede keeping pace with Kane. Together, they subdued the rabbits, though one escaped. Kane gave chase, but Millie shouted not to go into the forest, a haven for mythic monsters that sometimes threaten the city. Kane respected the risk but yearned to explore someday. That night, Kane realized he had reached the 8th level after just a handful of rabbits. He learned his divine title granted 100-fold more experience and skill with each rise. Appreciating the rapid pace of his progress, he worried the nation might someday view him as a hazard. Several months later, Millie brought Kane to the Adventurers Guild for tougher opponents. Inside, Rudy inquired what they sought, and Millie explained they needed fitting tasks for Kane. A man ridiculed Millie and Nina for being D-class and babysitting a child. He suggested Millie abandon Kane for a real man's company. Nina told him off, but he retaliated and picked her up as his friends restrained Millie. Just as he moved toward Nina, Kane intervened, vowing to shield his tutors. Millie begged him to run, but Kane insisted he needed to train and slapped the brute. The thug tried to punch, but Kane sidestepped and threw him off balance. Kane gave his name, but the man renewed his attack. He pulled out a blade and lunged at Kane with blinding speed, but Kane slipped past each swing and grabbed the blade by hand before tossing it aside. The remaining men held knives to Millie, but Kane swiftly dispatched them too, kicking them away. Nina thanked Kane and swore to defend him next time. After years training and enjoying time together, Kane matured into a tall and attractive youth. Sylvia informed him his lessons were nearly finished, and Kane felt grateful and joyful. He remembered Millie wanted a magical pouch, so he set out to obtain one in appreciation. That evening, he sneaked into the depths of the shadowy forest. There, he encountered and defeated a blood ogre and an earth dragon. Guards mistook the commotion for a monster rampage, summoning the army with Garm at the lead. Kane took what he needed and vanished, leaving only a towel. Garm arrived to discover Kane's towel among the slain monsters. For Kane's final lesson, Millie and Nina looked back fondly at their teaching. They praised him for his diligence and congratulated his graduation over 3 years. Kane thanked them and presented magic bags crafted using forest finds, saying they could contain enough for an entire manor. Millie was stunned, noting the finest magical bags could only fit 2 carriages worth. She warned that revealing such a treasure might make them targets. Relieved, she heard Kane enchanted them to be impossibly heavy if stolen. Millie and Nina thanked him, promising eternal support. Their journey together ended there. Months on, Kane faced a scarlet dragon in a deep cavern, dispatching it in a single slash. He realized his magical power surpassed 80 million and earned the Dragon Slayer title. 2 years passed, and 10-year-old Kane was to attend a noble celebration for his birthday, with travel expected to last a week if unimpeded by monsters. Using his perception, Kane scanned 3 kilometers and detected soldiers ambushed by beasts. He told his father to hurry, but the carriage was sluggish. Leaping from it like a superhero, Kane used wind magic to rush to the soldiers. He saved one surrounded guard, slicing the monsters with wind. Some beasts stormed the carriage, but Cain summoned his sword and felled them in one move. Facing the lead monster, he jumped skyward, enchanting his blade with fire before finishing it. A guard told Cain to steer clear of the vehicle, but Cain revealed he was Garm's son. Garm's men arrived and saw they were overwhelmed. One soldier bled seriously, and Cain healed him and his comrades instantly. Garm showed up amidst chaos, noticing the royal crest. Two girls, Telestia, a princess, and Silk, a duke's daughter, thanked Garm, but he said it was Cain who saved them. Telestia nearly fainted, so Cain cast a soothing spell, easing their distress. Telestia thanked him again, as Silk held his hand, calling him the bravest swordsman she'd seen. Telestia claimed him, sparking a quarrel. The girls hauled Cain away to their carriage, right before Garm's eyes. Inside, Cain wondered why they sat so near. Telestia, too upset to let him go, asked him to call her Teleeyes. Silk asked for Silk. Cain's magic had worked too well, and the girls tried to impress him. The soldiers announced the rest stop, but Cain realized his situation was complicated. At the rest area, Cain attempted escape, but Telestia and Silk insisted on staying with him, citing their fright. Garm argued that it was improper, but they claimed trauma. Silk called Garm useless next to Cain. The girls begged, and Cain agreed to sleep only if the beds were far apart. Garm reminded him that two wives mean double trouble. That evening, the girls pushed the beds together and clung to Cain, who became their pillow. Cain, exhausted, realized he'd created a harem at age 10 and wished for single life. After several sleepless nights, they reached the capital. The head knight saluted Cain, hearing of his bravery. Cain returned the fallen to their families with his storage. When the bell rang, Cain tried leaving, but the knight directed him to a royal audience. Every major figure had gathered for Cain's meeting with the king. Cain bowed, and the king praised him for rescuing Telestia and Silk from 50 orcs, gifting him a mansion, 10 platinum, and the title of baron. A disgruntled noble protested, awarding a child such wealth. The king silenced him, threatening to leave him overweight forever. He insisted the nation needed more knights like Cain, dismissing objections. The king asked if Cain accepted the rewards, and Cain humbly agreed. Yet, the king wished to converse privately. Garm congratulated Cain on his mansion before his brothers got theirs. The king arrived with the girls, and Cain knew better than to mention the events of the prior night. The king and the duke thanked Cain for saving their daughters. The king had a serious topic to broach. He asked Cain if he would accept being betrothed to his daughters and the duke's child. Marriage would wait until Cain was grown, but since he'd spent the night with unmarried women, their reputations were at stake. The king claimed Cain must accept, lest he risk divine anger. While the count devised the plan to learn more about Cain, both girls genuinely wanted to marry him. Fearing Cain's escalating powers, the king hoped to keep him close. Cain felt overwhelmed. His father provided no aid, and the stress was intense. With no alternative, Cain agreed to the engagements. Telestia and Silk were delighted, swearing to remember their last night. Cain tried to deny any wrong, blaming the bed's arrangement. They asked for clarification, and he apologized. Shortly after, Cain visited the sacred church to speak to the gods. Xenom wondered about his delay, but Cain explained his overwhelming stats made him the mightiest human. Xenom asked if Cain wanted to be a demigod, but told him even that had limits. Xenom suggested forging bonds and asked if Cain could create entertainment using his old world's knowledge. Cain envisioned inventing a perfect game, which Xenom and the tech god encouraged. Later, his sister Rhianni shopped for clothes, and Cain, weary of her hobby, ducked outside and spotted Parma, the girl he had rescued years ago. Her uncle, Tamanis, introduced himself and was surprised to meet a noble. Cain requested to be treated normally and browsed Tamanis' craft shop, where each item was personally made. Cain commissioned something special, showing blueprints for the game he imagined. Tamanis liked the project and promised to craft a prototype. Cain paid him in gold, calling it an investment in friendship. Tamanis accepted humbly and vowed to make the best game board ever. As Cain left, Riani scolded him for running off. She demanded to know why he didn't see all the clothes she tried on for him. Cain bluntly said she'd look beautiful in all of them. Riani, surprisingly pleased that her brother thinks she's beautiful, decided to make his day. This lowly spent all night trying on different outfits to impress him and planned to punish him by making him try them on. However, Sylvia came to the rescue, informing Cain that Tamanis had finished the prototype. Cain was amazed at how perfectly it matched his vision. They spent the afternoon playing the game together, and Tamanis was confident it would become a hit. Cain suggested creating a fancier version for the nobles, predicting wealthier people would want a luxurious product. He proposed making 50 noble versions and 1,000 regular versions. Tamanis agreed but mentioned his company couldn't afford such a large inventory. Cain solved the problem by smashing some more gold coins like a billionaire. To protect their product, they created a patent by presenting the board to the commerce god and committing to their contract, which glowed golden, signaling its fulfillment. Cain made one more request for an extravagant game for the royal family. Tamanis was honored, and Parma was impressed by Cain's connections. Cain knew the gods were probably enjoying the game he created for them. The next day was Cain's debut ceremony. Garm warned him to watch out for parents trying to introduce their daughters. Cain jokingly replied that he would create the largest harem, shocking Garm with his boldness. Inside the castle, Cain saw Corgina with his children and thought he looked unpleasant. The Duke and Silk approached, and while the Duke's smile made Cain uneasy, he thanked Cain for saving his daughter. Realizing he was in a tight spot, Cain boldly told Silk she was the most beautiful girl in all the lands and promised never to leave her. Garm, not one to let his son be outdone, told the Duke that Cain was the main character, and they walked off. Garm then told Cain he didn't act like a typical 10-year-old. The royal guards blew the trumpets, and the king made his entrance. Cain, too smitten with the princess's beauty, barely listened to the speech. Afterward, he greeted the king and told the princess she was more beautiful than a goddess, deciding against saying anything too forward. He promised Tuluska he would never leave her. The king, impressed by Cain's charm, praised Garm for raising such a charismatic son. Cain apologized for his banter and presented the king with the reverse-eye game he had developed. The king, intrigued, wanted to hear more and commanded Cain to visit his room later or face execution. Cain reluctantly agreed. Garm asked when Cain had become such a business magnate. Cain explained he needed to manage his mansion, noting he was now richer than his own father. Garm accepted the playful insult, proud that his children had become more successful. He encouraged Cain to make friends his age. Just then, Silk arrived and tried to steal Cain away. They sat together, and Silk made sure Talusha didn't have a chance with him. However, Corgino's children interrupted. One complimented Silk's dress, but she ignored him. One of the lackeys told Cain to leave, but Cain introduced himself instead. Habit, one of the lackeys, told Cain to apologize for bothering Silk. Cain refused and said Habit should apologize first. Infuriated, Habit challenged Cain to a duel. Silk, worried, hugged Cain for protection, but Habit insisted on starting the battle. Silk continued to hold on to Cain, frustrating Habit's lackeys, who tried to summon a storm with a rain dance. Silk told them to stop, revealing that Cain was a baron and the third son of Baron von Silford, who had saved the princess from an army of 30 orcs. Habit and his lackeys, realizing their mistake, bowed and begged for forgiveness before running away. Silk realized Cain could have revealed his status at any time but chose to make them look foolish. She promised to tell the princess about it, but Cain begged her not to. Silk agreed to keep it a secret if Cain went on a date with her. Telestia arrived and asked what the secret was. Cain stopped Silk from speaking, but Telestia, feeling left out, demanded a date with Cain too. Cain, thinking she looked cute, agreed. The king overheard and asked what was happening. Telestia told him to mind his business, making Cain realize he had raised a monster. The king said they needed a long talk, and Cain feared he was finally going to be executed for his interactions with both the princess and the duke's daughter. The next day, Cain played the game he invented with the count, but the king got upset because he wasn't invited. The duke congratulated Cain on the game and wanted to play reverse-eye with him and everyone else in the palace. Cain started regretting making the game. After a week of avoiding the king, Cain finally visited his new mansion. It was in terrible shape, not maintained for years. Using his magic, he cleaned and fixed up the entire place, including the backyard. Everything looked brand new. Sylvia arrived, excited to be his personal maid, and brought a team of maids and a butler to help with the noble duties. The maids were amazed to see the place spotless, and Cain explained he had used magic to clean it. Colin, the butler, reminded Cain that his older brothers were visiting today. At Garm's mansion, Cain's brothers congratulated him on getting his own place first. They were proud of their younger brother. Cain gave his family a tour of his new mansion. Garm, remembering it as a wreck, was confused and asked if Cain had fixed it up. Cain admitted he used magic to remodel it. Sarah was proud of her strong son, unlike Garm, who is worthless. Garm wished Cain had decorated the place more like other nobles, with fancy items like paintings, vases, and mounted trophies. Cain had an idea and disappeared for a moment. When he returned, Sylvia and the maids were screaming at the sight of a mounted red dragon. Garm asked why it was there, and Cain explained he had defeated the dragon himself. Garm was impressed, knowing the dragon was worth a lot of money. Suddenly, Sarah screamed from the bathroom. Cain and Garm rushed in to find her amazed by the fancy toilet. Garm tried it out and realized it would impress their guests. Cain wondered why they'd have visitors, and Garm explained that owning a mansion meant hosting a debut party and inviting nobles. Cain wasn't thrilled, but Colin presented a guest list to make it easier. As Cain looked through the list, he saw that his least favorite person, Ugly Fiso, was invited, but not the king. Only counts or higher-ranked nobles could invite royalty. Cain realized the party required lots of preparation and gifts. Sylvia suggested creating unique gifts and a special type of hospitality. Inspired, Cain used his magic to make glass cups, as porcelain was common. For food, he chose hamburgers, which Sylvia loved, and for drinks, carbonated wine, which she found interesting. Colin then informed Cain that the king wanted to see him. The king was angry and demanded to know why he hadn't been invited to Cain's party, slamming his desk in frustration. The duke smugly showed his invitation, suggesting Silk was the better daughter. The king, almost in tears, complained about being neglected by his future son-in-law. Cain quickly explained he hadn't had the chance to give the king his invitation due to his busy schedule. He handed over the invitation, and the king happily showed it off, announcing that Telestia would be attending too. The night of the debut party arrives, and Cain welcomes everyone inside. The duke arrives with Silk, and Cain compliments her as the most beautiful there. They admire the red dragon statue, and Silk can't wait to live there with him. Colin informs Cain it's time for his speech, so Cain thanks everyone for coming and hopes they enjoy his offerings. He raises his drink for a toast, and his parents love the fizzy taste. The glasses, which look like treasure chests, also impress them. Cain announces that he prepared them as gifts for everyone to take home. The king arrives and tastes the fizzy drink, experiencing a heavenly sensation. When he bites into the hamburger, he's amazed by the creamy cheese and meat combination, describing it as harmony in his mouth. Taluska enjoys it too. The queen, having tried the bathroom sprayer, begs Cain to install one in the royal bathroom. Curious, the king tries it and has a loud reaction that everyone hears. He exits the bathroom nonchalantly and scolds Cain for keeping the sprayer from him, demanding it be installed immediately. Cain promises to do so, and the king praises his hospitality, calling it the ultimate experience. The entire crowd congratulates Cain, filling him with joy for his efforts being recognized. However, Colin informs him that trouble is on the way. Corgino arrives and immediately insults Cain's mansion, calling it a doghouse. Cain doesn't let Colin warn him about the dragon statue, so when Corgino sees it, he screams in terror. Cain apologizes, saying the expensive red dragon surprised him. Corgino criticizes Cain's taste, but everyone else thinks Corgino's attitude is vile, especially since he arrived after the king. At the table, Sylvia offers Corgino some carbonated wine, which he initially insults but ends up loving. He calls the hamburger disgusting but eats every last bit. All the nobles notice his mistreatment of Cain. Colin warns Cain to stay composed, giving Cain a brilliant idea. He offers Corgino some glasses, calling them a meager offering. Corgino insults them but demands 100 glasses and the hamburger recipe. Cain refuses, saying they are gifts for everyone at the party. Frustrated, Corgino demands immediate compliance. Cain tries to stall, mentioning an even more amazing red object approaching. Corgino, excited, asks to see it right away. Cain introduces the kingdom's most valuable jewel, the king himself, who appears behind Corgino. Corgino is shocked and asks why the king is at such a lowly person's home. The king angrily responds that Cain saved his daughter, and the duke questions Corgino's actions. The king threatens to strip Corgino of his rank if he continues to mistreat Cain. Corgino, trying to save face, claims he was impressed by the meal and hospitality. The king commands him to start acting like a noble and to leave immediately. Silk approaches Cain, knowing he set everything up, and the duke asks if they were used as part of Cain's plan. Cain smiles, realizing that his careful planning paid off, and the event ends successfully. A week later, Cain was walking when Captain Dame approached him. The Prime Minister had sent Dame to get some monster materials from Cain, so Dame led him to the storage room. However, Cain thought the room was way too small for what he had. Dame was taken aback, wondering if Cain had materials the size of the red dragon in his mansion. Cain clarified that it was actually from the legendary Earth Dragon, which a party of the strongest adventurers couldn't defeat. Dame was shocked but instructed Cain to leave the monsters in the field. Cain released all the rare monsters from his item box. Seeing the sheer number, Dame asked if Cain was a hero or a disciple of the gods, causing Cain to panic for a moment. He said goodbye and tried to leave, but Dame invited him to train with the knights and meet their leader. Cain realized he was in over his head again. Dame introduced Cain to the soldiers and announced they would be dueling him. One soldier, worried about fighting a 10-year-old, suggested Cain go first. Cain agreed, activated his boost ability, and defeated the soldier in a flash. Trying to leave, Dame insisted Cain fight all the soldiers at once. This is how Cain ended up facing the entire army. Just as Cain was about to be overwhelmed, the leader shouted for everyone to stop. She asked why the whole army was fighting a child and hugged Cain, trying to comfort him. Cain was stunned to see she was an elf. She demanded an explanation from Dame, who revealed that Cain had saved the princess from 30 orcs. Understanding the situation, she challenged Cain to a duel herself, emitting a menacing aura. The soldiers thought this would be the end for Cain and wished him well in the afterlife. Cain noticed she was using a real sword and asked why. She said it made things more interesting and rushed at him. Despite his efforts, her agility was unmatched. She enhanced her physical abilities, and they clashed swords, impressing the soldiers with her speed. Cain tried various tactics but couldn't break through her defense. Finally, he used his teleportation ability, appearing next to her with his sword at her throat, declaring the duel over. The elf, experiencing the thrill of her life, hugged Cain and declared she was going to marry him. Cain, bewildered, pointed out they had just met. She introduced herself as Tefana, the Duke's daughter, and reassured him that elves live for 300 years, so she would stay young for a long time. Cain tried to escape, saying she needed her father's approval first. She replied that her family wouldn't let her return home without a spouse. Cain insisted he needed to ask permission from many people first and look to Dame for help, but he had fallen asleep. Tefana then decided to take the matter to the king, dragging Cain along. Cain thought this was the worst possible outcome as they headed to the palace. Inside the king's castle, the king was surprised to see Cain back so soon. Tefana, her voice changing, announced they were going to get married. The king asked for an explanation, and Cain explained that he had beaten her with his wooden stick so skillfully that she now wanted to marry him. The other girls hadn't heard about this, but that wasn't the main issue. Dame explained that Tefana was not just the army leader but also essentially a princess from an elf kingdom. The king broke the news to her that Cain was already engaged to his daughter and the Duke's daughter. Tefana, shocked but impressed, thought Cain must be amazing to have won over both. The king knew this was difficult, but Tefana wanted to marry Cain even more. The king said he would only discuss it further if she got her father's permission. Tefana agreed and told Cain they were going to spar with their sticks to deepen their bond. The king wondered how the strongest knight in the kingdom was defeated and asked Garm if he knew Cain's story. Garm was clueless, but Dame remembered Cain's panic when the gods were mentioned. This made the king suspicious. The count suggested testing Cain by showing him a mythical book. Cain, exhausted from a week of training, heard Tefana calling him and tried to escape, but Dame dragged him to the king's room. The king asked why Cain looked so sad, and Cain replied that he was tired of seeing the king's ugly face. The king ignored the insult and said he had something to show Cain. The count presented an emperor-level magic book, passed down from the first king, Yuya. Cain asked if he could read it, and the king gave permission. As Cain read the book, he realized he knew all the spells and was glad to learn how to cast them. The king revealed that the text was in a language no one else could read, Japanese. Cain realized the first king must have also reincarnated. The king asked Cain to explain who he truly was. Cain, deciding to trust them, revealed that he had memories from his previous life in Japan, the same land as the first king. He apologized for not telling them sooner. Garm asked if he was really his son, and Cain confirmed that the gods had told him so when he turned 5. The entire room was shocked that Cain had met the gods. Garm asked Cain to show his real status. The room panicked when they saw his levels, which were beyond human. The king didn't know what to do, as Cain's god's chosen title meant he was the epitome of humanity, and even kings should bow to him. Cain begged them to treat him the same as before, explaining that despite his past life's memories, this was the life he had always wanted, with a loving family and incredible abilities. The king accepted Cain's wish and promised to treat him the same. However, he joked that maybe Cain should be king instead. Just then, Tefana entered with her father's consent to marry Cain, adding another girl to Cain's growing harem. She took him away, and the duke assured the king that Cain would always be the same. The king ordered everyone to keep Cain's secret and wished for Cain to protect the kingdom, his family, and anyone in need. In the years that followed, Cain got really into reading the book left by Yuya. It said that if Cain could read it, he must be from Japan just like Yuya. The book talked all about Yuya's life, including how he got hit by Truck Kuin and ended up in this new world. Unlike Cain, Yuya wasn't reborn, he was just summoned here. While Cain was reading, Silk and Talusha came in, thinking he was studying for the academy entrance exams. They offered to study with him, but Cain, feeling annoyed, told them he didn't have time for their nonsense today. When they asked about tomorrow, he brushed them off, saying maybe some other time. As he walked down the hall, another girl, admirer number 3, ran towards him, asking for a training session. Cain, still in a hurry, promised another time and ran off. Today was special for Cain. It was his 12th birthday and the day he would register as an adventurer at the guild. As he entered the guild, he bumped into a red-haired man who noticed Kane's young age and reminded him to be careful. Kane thought the man looked familiar but continued to the receptionist, who asked if he wanted to register. He filled out the paperwork, deciding to hide his barren status since it wasn't important for adventuring. After handing over the form, the receptionist asked him to prick his finger for a blood magic test and then gave him a G-rank adventurer's card. Kane remembered his tutors being D-rank and wondered how they were doing. The receptionist introduced herself as Rasha, but 3 men interrupted, trying to get her to ditch Kane and hang out with them. Their leader tried to kick Kane but ended up falling. The other 2 rushed at Kane but crashed into each other. As the leader drew his sword, Kane calmly told him to wait. Just then, the red-haired man approached, offering to fight the troublemakers himself, causing them to flee when they recognized him as Claude. Kane thanked Claude, though Claude suspected Kane could handle himself. Claude invited Kane for a drink, giving him fruit juice since Kane was only 12. Curious about Kane's skills, Claude asked about his training, and Kane mentioned his tutors. Impressed, Claude cheered for Kane becoming an adventurer and revealed his party's name, Ice Flame. He explained that he used a flame sword while his wife used ice magic, allowing them to take on big quests and rank up quickly. Kane was impressed by Claude's gold card, showing he was a rank, but Claude downplayed it, mentioning the first king's legendary SSS rank. Just then, a wand hit Claude on the head, and his wife, Rena, scolded him for drinking. Claude introduced her to Kane, and Rena thought Kane was adorable. She offered to deal with any troublemakers for him, but Claude explained that Kane was quite capable himself. Annoyed, Rena threatened Claude and dragged him away by the ear, leaving Kane amused by the encounter. Kane wondered what kind of quest he should take with his G rank. He considered transporting items using his item box but decided that sounded too boring. Instead, he spotted a quest to defeat as many goblins as possible with no upper limit on the reward. Excited, he grabbed the quest and ran out of the guild, only to be stopped by Tefana, who had finally caught up to him. She asked what he was doing, and Kane explained he was heading out on his first adventure. Tefana decided to ditch her plans and join him, despite Kane's attempts to escape. Deep in the forest, Tefana was thrilled to spend some time with Kane in the beautiful scenery. Kane used his search ability and located a group of goblins ahead. Tefana eagerly rushed towards them, asking Kane to follow. When they arrived, they saw a civilian in danger. Kane quickly cast a healing spell on the civilian while Tefana charged at the goblins, taking them down with ease. A larger group of goblins appeared, and Kane used his magic to boost Tefana's physical abilities. She thanked him and continued fighting fiercely, vowing to stay by his side no matter what. Kane couldn't help but think that Tefana was a bit crazy, but he let her handle the goblins. Meanwhile, green lizards emerged, and Kane told Tefana he would deal with them. She ran off with the civilian, and Kane used his light and ice magic to eliminate the lizards. Tefana praised him, calling him the best husband ever. Later that day, Millie and Nina discovered a giant crater where the green lizards used to be, feeling a sense of déjà vu. Back at the guild, Kane told Risha he had defeated the green lizards and asked if he could still get the reward even though he hadn't officially claimed the quest. Risha was shocked, as defeating a group of green lizards was usually a C-rank task. Kane explained he had taken down about 30 of them. Risha ran to inform the chief, Cedric, who introduced himself to Kane and questioned how a G-rank adventurer could defeat the lizards. Cedric accused Kane of cheating, but Kane insisted. Kanzuya was a solitary figure who suddenly appeared in Isekai, drifting into a different world after an unfortunate incident. In this strange place, 7 divine entities endowed him with a unique growth mechanism, bestowing immense abilities upon him in this unfamiliar country. One day, on his walk home, he observed townspeople fleeing from a storefront in sheer panic. 2 girls toppled near his path, pursued by a thief brandishing a knife. Instead of escaping, Kanzuya lunged at the criminal, imploring the girls to run for safety. He was slashed across his waist, and the thief made his getaway. While Kazuya lay bleeding, he felt content that he had managed to save the girls, despite thinking his life was meaningless, but was saddened that he had frightened them. His vision dimmed, and when he woke, he was in an unfamiliar room. A maid greeted him as Kane and began sobbing, screaming for his mother. Omami wrapped him in a hug, demanding if he could recognize her. Kane felt baffled until he caught sight of his image in a mirror and realized he was a young child now. After a week in a coma, the staff concluded his illness had wiped his memory. Kane's mother instructed the maid, Sylvia, to make some broth for him. Left alone, Kane tried to make sense of why he'd reverted to being a child. He wondered if he'd landed inside an anime or another fantastical narrative. He examined every nook in his quarters in hopes of finding powerful artifacts but came up with nothing. He searched for his familiar oversized staff. Sylvia misconstrued his movements, suspecting he had an accident, leaving Kane embarrassed about his loss. When Sylvia departed, Kane analyzed his new circumstances. His new identity was Kane von Silford, a 3-year-old with parents named Garm and Sarah, a sister named Rianni, and 2 elder half-brothers via his father's second wife, Maria. Garm was an esteemed margrave who protected the land from beastly threats. Excited by the prospect of creatures and valorous champions, Kane eagerly wished to master magic. Sylvia promised to teach him spellcraft once he'd learned the written word, prompting him to devote himself immediately. Kane resolved to embrace this second opportunity, especially after the loneliness he'd felt in his former life post-tragedy. That evening at dinner, Garm was taken aback when his son demonstrated writing skills, and Rianni told of his talent for numbers. Sarah believed Kane to be phenomenally advanced. Kane, ever humble, praised Sylvia as the supreme maid, which made both parents suspicious. They questioned his newfound devotion to study. Sylvia remarked about breastfeeding him, which led Garm to wish he'd witnessed it. Kane replied that his curiosity was only for adventuring knowledge. Impressed by this zeal, Garm gave him access to his collection of arcane books, reminding him that official spell usage would only be allowed after the ritual at age 5. His mother approved, confident he wouldn't figure out magic prematurely. However, Kane discreetly began learning spells. He confirmed that true magic was at his disposal, filling him with elation unfamiliar to most ordinary children. Fantasizing like an anime enthusiast, he kept pushing boundaries. One night, attempting something new, he burnt his hands and briefly lost command, but was exhilarated by his evolving powers. Rianni stealthily slipped into his room and admitted that she knew about his secret lessons. Kane was relieved that she hadn't fully grasped his real prowess. Rianni started educating him more about their surroundings and recounted tales of the legendary founder hero, Yuya. Kane felt anticipation for the day of his initiation. The long-awaited event dawned. Dressed in fresh garments, he received compliments from his family about his appearance. They journeyed across town in wagons pulled by horses, and Kane marveled at the antiquated scenery. Curious about sacred gifts, he requested Rianni show her abilities screen. Amazed by her numbers, he spotted a corrupted mark. Rianni swiftly pleaded with him to ignore it, and Kane acted ignorant. Meanwhile, Garm explained that blessings from higher powers ranged in 5 degrees, each defining a practitioner's mastery. In the church, the priest initiated the naming ceremony. Without warning, a brilliant light bathed Kane, transporting him to a separate plane where he faced the 7 deities. They addressed him by his original name, Kazuya, which made him puzzle over the odd Santa Claus appearance of one god. Zenim, the deity of origins, identified himself and looked just like Father Christmas. Zenim could perceive his internal musings. They talked about Kazuya's selfless sacrifice, noting that authorities would have eventually caught the criminal regardless. The gods declared they had given Kane a second life because his altruism, even if superfluous, merited it. Kane expressed no regrets. Now, with a loving home and the chance to harness magic, he even dreamed of a harem like archetypal isekai protagonists. The The gods then distributed their boons. Reno, sovereign of sorcery, granted magical safety. Xenim, as the prime creator, gave protective shielding. The combat deity amplified his battle capacity. The technology god heightened his intellect. The commerce god awarded analytical power over his inventory, and the earth deity offered supreme real estate mastery. Xenim explained that Cain's stats page would reflect each endowment. After a light-hearted exchange, he was returned to his realm. Back in the sanctuary, the priest was stunned by the divine aura and asked to inspect Cain's attribute menu. Feeling uneasy, Cain hurried to the restroom for privacy, where he examined his abilities. To his astonishment, every blessing was maxed at level 10, twice the typical maximum. Realizing the importance of keeping his advantages under wraps, he employed a clandestine feature to disguise his true prowess to others. That evening over the birthday banquet, Cain joined his relatives in a moment of revelry. Garm asked to finally see Cain's skill panel. When Cain revealed it for all to witness, everyone was astounded to find all 7 deities had favored him and his magic ability soared beyond 340,000. At just 5 years old, he eclipsed almost all grand mages known. His father, shocked, had him promise solemnly to conceal his capabilities. Cain unenthusiastically consented and retreated to his chambers. There, he encountered a book detailing summoning spells and, with Sylvia absent, decided to attempt conjuring a beloved garden pet. Activating the seal, instead of a charming animal, he accidentally summoned a towering and grotesque beast, terrifying his sister and Parma. Cain mused that something like this had happened before, but vowed things would end differently this time. Charging at the monster, he took a beating, enduring wave after wave of pain. Despite the agony, Cain resolved not to let loved ones suffer again. Gathering his energy, he unleashed a devastating spell that expelled the creature from the room. Collapse took him, yet he glanced at the soft feline ears he had yearned for, wishing he could reach out and stroke them. Remorseful for frightening everyone and anxious about his fate, he was surprised to awaken, alive, and relieved that everyone was safe and tranquil. Cain realized his exceptional abilities had made it possible to protect those he cared about within this world. On his birthday, Cain's father inquired about his ambitions. Cain openly admitted his aim was to form a harem. He wanted to journey, help others, and become an adventurer who brings happiness wherever he goes. Garm, touched by his son's conviction, pledged to hire a mentor for him. Alone, Cain speculated about what sort of instructor he might get, but when she finally arrived, he became so giddy he accidentally transported himself outside, making an awkward landing. Cain gave a swift apology on the spot, and the butler introduced his 2 new instructors, Millie and Nina. Inside the manor, Millie blushed recalling the recent incident, while Cain noticed Nina's pointed ears, recognizing she was an elf. Garm instructed both teachers not to be overly formal with Cain, and he requested that they treat him as an equal. Millie eagerly launched into their lessons, beginning inside the practice hall. Cain's sword skills left Millie speechless. To better gauge him, Millie proposed a duel. Cain rushed at her, and she could only barely parry his powerful swings. Nina wondered aloud whether Cain held a rare divine blessing for combat. Reluctantly, Cain admitted he was meant to keep such things hidden. Worn out, Millie asked Nina to give Cain a magic demonstration before he totally shattered her pride. Nina revealed that her magical blessing only reached the 3rd tier, but Cain was already well-versed in the basics. Demonstrating his mastery over all elements, he obliterated stone targets with precise spells. Cain casually admitted he enjoyed the protection of the magic god as well. The 2 instructors exchanged glances, realizing they could no longer guide him much further. Millie sighed, lamenting there was little left to teach someone so far advanced. When Cain pulled a fabric from his storage cube, it further stunned them. He proposed moving their practice outdoors to avoid accidental damage to the estate. Since he'd never left the property before, both instructors agreed it was time to see more of the outside world. Explaining the predicament to Garm, They said Kane's powers simply surpassed what the estate could handle, which gave Garm fresh anxiety about his son's overwhelming capability. Although he'd anticipated this day would come, he'd hoped it would be much later. In the end, he allowed Kane to leave the premises, but sternly warned him never to venture into the woods. Kane promised and set off with his tutors. Nina initiated Kane's magic practice outdoors by asking for a demonstration of intermediate-level spells. Without delay, Kane prepared a fire incantation and hurled it at a boulder, creating a large hole and knocking both instructors off their feet. They questioned if exerting such force made him weary, but Kane simply chuckled, showing he remained completely energetic. Without warning, Millie sensed threats approaching from a distance. A rabbit burst through the brush, springing at Millie, whose first strike missed. It lunged at Kane, but he sidestepped and finished it off using wind projectiles. Millie asked if he planned to sell the rabbit as a harvest, but Kane wanted his family to see it first, so he neatly tucked it into his storage box. Millie was astonished. She'd saved up for years to afford a magical pouch herself. Hers, though valuable, was still a step below Kane's advanced storage cube. Meanwhile, Nina activated a detection spell capable of sensing all creatures within 300 meters. Kane, impressed, flawlessly copied her spell and instantly detected for rabbits nearby. Nina was taken aback that he could count individual targets, not just sense them. The trio dashed after the prey, and at that moment Millie teased Nina to admit Kane was setting the pace, not them. The three worked together to take down most of the rabbits, though one fled. Kane gave chase, but Millie reminded him sternly not to enter the wooded area, warning it was home to legendary monsters that occasionally menaced the city. Kane respected the danger but secretly hoped to explore there someday. That night, Kane was amazed to discover he'd advanced to the 8th level after hunting only a few rabbits. His sacred status granted him a 100-fold experience and boosted skill increase with every step. Enjoying his meteoric rise in strength, he worried that someday, the kingdom might perceive him as a potential danger. Several months later, Millie escorted Kane to the Adventurers Guild, seeking tougher assignments suited to his abilities. Inside the guild, Rudy asked what they sought, and Millie explained they were hunting for appropriate challenges for Kane. A man sneered at Millie and Nina, mocking them as low-level babysitters for a child, and suggested Millie abandon Kane in favor of more serious company. Nina retorted sharply, but the man grabbed her, causing his companions to restrain Millie. As he advanced toward Nina, Kane intervened, vowing to protect his teachers. Millie urged him to flee, but Kane insisted on standing firm and struck the thug. The bully threw a punch, but Kane dodged and countered, throwing him off balance. When asked for his name, Kane gave it, but the attacker renewed his assault. Drawing a blade, he lunged at Kane with blinding speed, but Kane weaved between strikes, skillfully gripping the knife and tossing it aside. The rest of the gang brandished daggers against Millie, but Kane dispatched them swiftly, knocking them back. Nina thanked Kane, swearing loyalty and promising to defend him in the future. Years of training and shared experiences transformed Kane into a tall, handsome youth. Sylvia informed him his lessons were nearing completion, filling Kane with gratitude and joy. Remembering Millie's desire for a magical pouch, he set out to procure one as a token. That night, he ventured deep into the shadowed forest. There, he confronted and defeated a blood ogre and an earth dragon. Alarmed by the commotion, guards summoned the army, with Garm leading. Kane collected needed items and vanished, leaving behind only a towel. Upon arrival, Garm found Kane's towel amongst the slain beasts, impressed and bewildered. For Kane's concluding lesson, Millie and Nina gazed fondly on their time teaching him. They praised his dedication and congratulated him on graduating after 3 years. Kane expressed his thanks and presented exquisitely crafted magical bags made from forest materials, boasting the capacity to hold enough goods for a full manor. Millie was astonished. Even the best magical bags typically only held 2 carriage loads. She cautioned that revealing such treasure might attract unwanted attention, but Cain reassured her by enchanting the bags to become impossibly heavy if stolen. Both instructors thanked him warmly, pledging eternal support. Their journey together came to an end there. Months later, Cain confronted a crimson dragon deep within a cavern, vanquishing it with a single slash. Realizing his magical power surpassed 80 million, he earned the title Dragon Slayer. 2 years passed, and now 10-year-old Cain prepared to attend a noble celebration for his birthday. Travel was expected to take a full week without monster interference. Using his perception, Cain scanned 3 kilometers ahead, spotting soldiers ambushed by beasts. He urged his father to hurry, but their carriage was unreasonably slow. Leaping from it like a hero, Cain summoned wind magic and raced toward the soldiers. He rescued one trapped guard, cutting down the monsters with gusting blade slashes. Some creatures assailed the carriage, but Cain manifested his sword and slew them effortlessly. Facing the lead beast, he soared skyward, imbuing his blade with flames before delivering the finishing strike. A guard urged Cain to avoid the carriage, but Cain revealed his identity as Garm's son. Garm's men arrived and surveyed the chaos. One soldier was severely injured, and Cain healed him and his comrades instantly. Garm appeared amid the turmoil, noticing his crest. 2 girls, Telestia, a princess, and Silk, a duke's daughter, thanked Garm, but he corrected them that it was Cain who saved them. Telestia nearly fainted, so Cain cast a calming spell to soothe them. Telestia expressed her gratitude once more while Silk clasped Cain's hand, declaring him the bravest swordsman she'd ever witnessed. Telestia claimed Cain, sparking a quarrel over him. The young ladies escorted Cain to their carriage right before Garm's eyes. Inside, Cain wondered why they sat so closely. Telestia, too distraught to relent, asked him to call her Teloise. Silk insisted on being addressed as Silk. Cain's spells had worked exceptionally well, and the girls competed to impress him. The soldiers announced a rest stop, but Cain realized his predicament had become rather complicated. At the halt, Cain tried to escape, but Telestia and Silk insisted on staying with him, citing trauma. Garm argued it was improper, but they claimed fear. Silk mocked Garm's incompetence compared to Cain. The girls begged, and Cain agreed to sleep only if the beds were kept apart. Garm reminded him that 2 wives meant twice the trouble. That night, the girls pushed the beds together and clung to Cain, who reluctantly became their pillow. Exhausted, Cain realized he'd unintentionally formed a harem at age 10 and longed for a life without such complications. After several sleepless nights, they reached the capital. The head knight saluted Cain, having heard of his heroics. Cain returned the fallen soldiers' belongings to their families via his storage cube. When the bell rang, Cain tried to leave, but the knight directed him to a royal audience. Every major dignitary had gathered for Cain's meeting with the king. Cain bowed, and the king praised his bravery in rescuing Telestia and Silk from a force of 50 orcs. He presented Cain with a mansion, 10 platinum coins, and the noble title of Baron. A jealous noble protested awarding such riches to a child. The king silenced the opposition, threatening eternal weight gain if he continued to complain. Insisting the kingdom needed knights like Cain, the king dismissed objections. When asked if he accepted the rewards, Cain humbly agreed. However, the king wished to speak privately. Garm congratulated Cain on his mansion, even before his brothers had theirs. The king arrived with the 2 girls, and Cain knew better than to mention the previous night's events. The king and the duke thanked Cain for saving their daughters. The king then addressed a serious matter. He asked Cain if he would accept being betrothed to his daughters and the duke's child. While marriage was to wait until Cain was grown, spending the night with unmarried women had put their reputations at risk. The king insisted Cain accept, or else face divine wrath. The count devised a plan to learn more about Cain, while the girls genuinely wished to wed him. Fearing Cain's growing power, the king hoped to keep him close. Overwhelmed and without support from his father, Cain agreed to the engagements. Telestia and Silk were delighted, recalling their last night together. Cain tried to deny wrongdoing, blaming bed arrangements. When asked for clarification, he apologized. Soon after, Cain visited the sacred church to consult the deities. Xenom questioned his tardiness, but Cain explained that his overwhelming stats had made him the strongest mortal. Xenom asked if Cain aspired to ascend to demigod status, but cautioned that even that had limits. Xenom suggested fostering connections and asked if Cain had ideas to create entertainments using his prior world's knowledge. Cain envisioned designing a perfect game, a notion the tech god encouraged enthusiastically. Later, his sister Rhianni indulged in shopping. Tiring of her hobby, Cain slipped outside and spotted Parma, the girl he'd rescued years ago. Parma's uncle, Tamanis, introduced himself and was surprised to meet a noble. Cain requested to be treated normally and browsed Tamanis's workshop, where every item was handmade. Cain commissioned a special project, showing blueprints for the game he imagined. Tamanis liked the idea and vowed to craft a prototype. Cain paid with gold, deeming it an investment in friendship. Tamanis accepted humbly and promised to make the best game board ever. As Cain departed, Rhianni scolded him for running away. Rhianni demanded to know why he hadn't noticed all the clothing she tried on for him. Cain straightforwardly said she looked beautiful in every outfit. Rhianni, pleasantly surprised that her brother thought her beautiful, decided to brighten his day. This little girl spent the entire night trying various dresses to impress him and planned to make him try them on as a playful punishment. However, Sylvia arrived just in time, informing Cain that Tamanis had completed the prototype. Cain was amazed by how perfectly it matched his vision. They spent the afternoon playing the game together, and Tamanis was confident it would be a success. Cain suggested making a deluxe version for nobles, predicting wealthier customers would desire a fancier product. He proposed producing 50 noble editions and 1,000 regular editions. Tamanis agreed but noted his workshop couldn't support such a large inventory. Cain solved this issue by splashing more gold like a wealthy magnate. To safeguard their creation, they secured a patent by presenting the board to the commerce god and signing a contract, which glowed golden, symbolizing its acceptance. Cain requested one last extravagant game version for the royal family. Tamanis felt honored, and Parma admired Cain's influential connections. Cain imagined the gods thoroughly enjoying the game he had crafted for them. The following day marked Cain's debut ceremony. Garm warned him of parents trying to unionize him with their daughters. Cain jokingly declared he would build the largest harem imaginable, shocking Garm with his sheer boldness. Within the castle, Cain spotted Corgina with his children, whom he found unpleasant. The Duke and Silk approached, and although the Duke's smile unsettled Cain, he thanked him for rescuing his daughter. Realizing his precarious situation, Cain boldly told Silk she was the most beautiful woman in all the lands and promised never to leave her side. Garm, unwilling to let his son be outshone, told the Duke that Cain was the main protagonist, and they walked away. Afterward, Garm remarked that Cain didn't behave like a typical 10-year-old. The royal guards sounded the trumpets, and the king made his entrance. Cain, too infatuated with the princess's beauty, barely paid attention to the speech. Afterwards, he greeted the king and told the princess she was more radiant than a goddess, refraining from saying anything too bold. He promised Toluska he would never abandon her. The king, impressed by Cain's charm, praised Garm for raising such a charismatic son. Cain apologized for his playful remarks and presented the king with the reverse-eye game he had developed. Intrigued, the king demanded to hear more and ordered Cain to visit his chamber later, threatening execution if he refused. Reluctantly, Cain agreed. Garm asked when Cain had become such a shrewd businessman. Cain explained he needed to manage his mansion, noting he was now wealthier than his father. Garm accepted the playful jab, proud his children were more successful. He encouraged Cain to make friends his own age. Suddenly, Silk arrived, attempting to steal Cain away. They sat together, and Silk ensured Talusha wouldn't stand a chance with him. However, Corgino's children interrupted. One complimented Silk's dress, but she ignored him. One of the attendants ordered Kane to leave, but Kane introduced himself instead. Habit, one attendant, told Kane to apologize for disturbing Silk. Kane refused, demanding Habit apologize first. Enraged, Habit challenged Kane to a duel. Silk, worried, clung to Kane for protection, but Habit insisted on beginning the fight. Silk kept holding Kane, irritating Habit's lackeys, who tried conjuring a storm with a rain dance. Silk stopped them, revealing that Kane was a baron and the third son of Baron von Silford who saved the princess from 30 orcs. Realizing their error, Habit and his cronies bowed and begged forgiveness before fleeing. Silk noted that Kane could have flaunted his status anytime but chose instead to make them look foolish. She vowed to reveal the secret to the princess, but Kane begged her not to. Silk agreed to keep the secret if Kane promised to go on a date with her. Talusha then arrived and demanded to know what the secret was. Kane stopped Silk from speaking, but Talusha, feeling excluded, insisted she too deserve a date with Kane. Finding her endearing, Kane agreed. The king overheard and inquired about the commotion. Talusha told him to mind his own affairs, making Kane realize he had raised a monster. The king said they needed a serious discussion. Kane feared he was finally going to be executed for his escapades with both the princess and the duke's daughter. The next day, Kane played the game he invented with the count, but the king was annoyed he had not been invited. The duke congratulated Kane on the game and proposed playing reverse-eye with him and the court. Kane began regretting inventing the game. After a week of avoiding the king, Kane finally visited his new mansion. It was in dreadful shape, neglected for years. Using his magic, he cleaned and restored the entire estate, including the gardens, making it look pristine. Sylvia arrived, excited to be his personal maid, bringing a team of maids and a butler to assist with noble duties. The staff was amazed the place was spotless, and Kane explained he had used magic to clean it. Colin, the butler, reminded Kane that his older brothers were visiting today. At Garm's mansion, Kane's brothers congratulated him for receiving his own residence first. Proud of their younger sibling, they accepted the tour of his mansion. Garm, recalling it as a ruin, was perplexed and asked if Kane had repaired it. Kane admitted to remodeling it with magic. Sarah was proud of her strong son, unlike Garm, whom she considered worthless. Garm wished Kane had adorned the house with typical noble accoutrements like paintings, ornate vases, and mounted trophies. Kane vanished briefly, then returned with Sylvia and the maids screaming at the sight of a mounted red dragon. Garm inquired its origin, and Kane explained he had slain the dragon himself. Garm was impressed, knowing the creature's great value. Suddenly, Sarah screamed from the bathroom. Kane and Garm rushed in to find her marveling at the fancy toilet. Garm tried it out and realized it would impress their visitors. Kane wondered why guests were expected, and Garm explained that owning a mansion meant hosting a debut party and inviting nobles. Kane wasn't thrilled, but Colin presented a guest list to ease the planning. Scanning the list, Kane noticed his least favorite person, the ugly Fiso, was invited but the king was not. Only counts or higher-ranked nobles could summon royalty. Kane realized the party required extensive preparation and gifts. Sylvia suggested unique presents and special hospitality. Inspired, Kane used magic to create glass cups. They were rarer than porcelain. For food, he chose hamburgers, which Sylvia loved, and for drinks, carbonated wine, which she found intriguing. Colin informed Kane that the king wanted to see him. The king was furious and demanded to know why he hadn't been invited to Kane's party, slamming his desk in frustration. The duke smugly displayed his invitation, claiming Silk was the better daughter. The king, nearly in tears, complained of being neglected by his future son-in-law. Kane quickly explained he had been too busy to invite the king properly. Handing over the invitation, the king gleefully displayed it, announcing that Talusha would attend as well. The night of the debut party arrived, and Cain welcomed everyone inside. The Duke arrived with Silk, and Cain praised her as the most beautiful attendee. They admired the red dragon statue, and Silk eagerly anticipated living there with him. Colin informed Cain it was time for his speech, so Cain thanked all for coming and hoped they enjoyed the offerings. Raising his drink for a toast, his parents loved the fizzy wine. The glasses, shaped like treasure chests, also impressed the guests. Cain explained he had prepared them all as take-home gifts. The king tasted the sparkling drink, experiencing heavenly delight. Biting into the hamburger, he was amazed by the creamy cheese and meat fusion, describing it as a harmony of flavors. Taluska enjoyed it as well. The queen, having tried the bathroom sprayer, begged Cain to install one in the royal bathroom. Curious, the king tested it, startling everyone with a loud reaction. He exited the bathroom nonchalantly and chastised Cain for hiding the sprayer, ordering immediate installation. Cain obliged, and the king praised his hospitality as the ultimate experience. The crowd congratulated Cain, filling him with joy. However, Colin warned him trouble was coming. Corgino arrived and immediately insulted Cain's mansion, calling it a doghouse. Cain ignored Colin's warning about the dragon statue, but when Corgino saw it, he screamed in terror. Cain apologized, saying the expensive red dragon startled him. Corgino criticized Cain's taste, but others found Corgino's attitude offensive, especially since he showed up after the king. At the table, Sylvia offered Corgino some carbonated wine. Though initially insulting it, Corgino ended up enjoying the drink. He called the hamburger disgusting but devoured it completely. The nobles noticed his disrespect towards Cain. Colin cautioned Cain to remain calm, which sparked a brilliant idea. He offered Corgino some glasses as a paltry gift. Corgino disparaged them but demanded 100 glasses and the hamburger recipe. Cain refused, saying the gifts were for all guests. Frustrated, Corgino insisted on immediate compliance. Cain tried to stall, mentioning an even more astonishing red object approaching. Corgino, excited, asked to see it. Cain introduced the kingdom's most precious jewel, the king himself, who appeared behind Corgino. Shocked, Corgino asked why the king was at such a lowly place. The king angrily declared Cain had saved his daughter, and the duke reprimanded Corgino's behavior. The king threatened to strip Corgino of his rank if he continued mistreating Cain. Trying to save face, Corgino claimed he was impressed by the food and service. The king ordered him to behave like a noble and leave immediately. Silk approached Cain, knowing he orchestrated the event, and the duke asked if they were pawns in Cain's plan. Cain smiled, realizing his careful planning had succeeded. The event concluded triumphantly. A week later, Cain was walking when Captain Dame approached him. The Prime Minister had sent Dame to retrieve some monster materials from Cain. Dame led him to the storage room. However, Cain thought the area far too small for what he possessed. Dame was taken aback, wondering if Cain's collection truly included creatures as large as the red dragon housed in his mansion. Cain clarified that the dragon was actually the legendary Earth Dragon, a beast even the kingdom's strongest adventurers failed to defeat. Dame was stunned but instructed Cain to keep the monsters in the field. Cain then released all the rare monsters from his inventory. Observing the vast number, Dame asked if Cain was a hero or a disciple of the gods, causing Cain to momentarily panic. Saying farewell, Cain tried to leave, but Dame invited him to train with the knights and meet their leader. Cain realized he was in over his head once more. Dame introduced Cain to the soldiers and announced they would duel him. One soldier, worried about fighting a child, suggested Cain start first. Cain agreed, activated his boost, and swiftly defeated the soldier. Attempting to depart, Dame insisted Cain fight the entire troop. This led Cain to confront the whole army. Just as Cain began to be overwhelmed, their leader shouted for a halt. She asked why the entire army was assaulting a child and hugged Cain to comfort him. Stunned, Cain recognized she was an elf. She demanded an explanation from Dame, who revealed Cain had saved the princess from 30 orcs. Understanding the scenario, she challenged Cain to a duel herself, exuding a daunting aura. The soldiers assumed Cain's defeat was imminent and wished him well in the afterlife. Cain noticed she wielded a genuine sword and asked why. She replied it made battles more thrilling before charging at him. Despite effort, her agility was unmatched. Enhancing her physical abilities, they clashed swords, impressing onlookers with her speed. Cain tried various tactics but couldn't overpower her defense. Finally, he teleported beside her with his sword at her throat, declaring the duel over. The elf, exhilarated, hugged Cain and vowed to marry him. Bewildered, Cain pointed out they had just met. She introduced herself as Tefana, the Duke's daughter, and reassured Cain that, as an elf, she'd remain youthful for centuries. Cain attempted to flee, insisting she seek her father's approval first. She replied that without a spouse, her family wouldn't permit her to return home. Cain claimed he needed permission from many others and looked to Dame for help, but he'd fallen asleep. Tefana then resolved to take the matter to the king, dragging Cain along. Cain thought this the worst outcome imaginable as they headed to the palace. Within the king's palace, the monarch was astonished to see Cain return so soon. Tefana's voice shifted as she announced their impending marriage. The king requested an explanation. Cain explained he had so skillfully overcome her with his wooden staff that she now wished to wed him. The other girls hadn't heard of this, but that was not the chief concern. Dame clarified that Tefana was not only the army's leader, but also a princess of the elf kingdom. The king informed her that Cain was already pledged to his daughter and the duke's child. Tefana was shocked but impressed, believing Cain must be extraordinary to have won over both. Though the king was cautious, Tefana's desire to marry Cain only intensified. The king stated he would consider the matter further only with her father's consent. Agreeing, Tefana told Cain they would spar with their sticks to strengthen their bond. The king wondered how the realm's strongest knight was defeated and questioned Garm about Cain's story. Garm was unaware, but Dame recalled Cain's panicked reaction when the gods were mentioned. These details raised the king's suspicions. The count proposed testing Cain by showing him a mythical tome. Cain, exhausted from the week's training, heard Tefana calling and attempted escape, but Dame dragged him to the king's chambers. The king inquired why Cain looked so weary. Cain replied he was tired of facing the king's displeased face. Ignoring the insult, the king presented an emperor-grade magic book, an heirloom from the first king, Yuya. Cain asked if he could read it, and the king consented. As Cain perused the text, he realized he knew all the spells already and was glad to learn their proper casting. The king revealed the language was Japanese, unknown to others. Cain inferred the first king must have also been reincarnated. The king requested Cain reveal his true identity. Deciding to trust them, Cain unveiled memories of his previous life in Japan, the same land as the first king. He apologized for not disclosing this sooner. Garm questioned if Cain was truly his son, and Cain confirmed the gods had told him so upon his 5th birthday. The entire assembly was shocked that Cain had met the gods. Garm implored Cain to show his authentic stats. Panic arose when they saw his levels far exceeded human limits. The king was uncertain how to proceed, as Cain's title of God's chosen signified he epitomized humanity, commanding even monarchs' respect. Cain beseeched them to treat him as before. Despite his past memories, he said this was his desired life, with a loving family and great powers. The king agreed to honor Cain's wishes and joked that perhaps Cain should be king instead. At that moment, Tefana entered with her father's blessing to wed Cain, adding another to Cain's growing harem. She whisked him away, while the duke assured the king Cain would remain unchanged. The king urged secrecy and hoped Cain would protect the kingdom, his kin, and those in need. In the years that followed, Cain devoted himself to reading the tome left by Yuya. It revealed that if Cain could decipher it, he must hail from Japan, just like Yuya. The book recounted Yuya's life, including how he was struck by Trukuin and ended up in this new world. Unlike Cain, who had been reborn, Yuya had been summoned. While Cain studied, Silk and Talusha entered, assuming he was preparing for the academy entrance exams. They offered to study with him, but Cain, growing annoyed, told them he didn't have time for their distractions that day. When they asked about the following day, he dismissed it, suggesting maybe another time. As Cain walked down the corridor, another girl, the third admirer, ran towards him seeking a training session. Cain, still in a hurry, promised another time and fled. That day was special for Cain. It was his 12th birthday and the day he would register as an adventurer at the guild. At the guild's entrance, Cain collided with a red-haired man who noticed Cain's youth and urged caution. Cain thought the man seemed familiar but kept moving towards the receptionist, who asked if he wished to register. Cain filled out the forms, deciding to hide his barren title since it didn't matter for adventuring. After submitting the paperwork, the receptionist asked him to prick his finger for a blood magic test, then issued him a G-rank adventurer card. Cain recalled his tutors were D-rank and wondered about their progress. The receptionist introduced herself as Rasha, but 3 men interrupted, trying to lure Cain away from her. Their leader attempted to kick Cain but fell. The 2 others collided as they charged at him. As the leader drew his sword, Cain calmly told him to wait. Just then, the red-haired man approached, offering to deal with the troublemakers himself. Recognizing him as Claude, the miscreants fled. Cain thanked Claude, though Claude believed Cain could handle himself. Claude invited Cain for a drink, giving him fruit juice as Cain was only 12. Curious about Cain's skills, Claude asked about his training. Cain mentioned his tutors. Impressed, Claude cheered Cain's adventurer status and revealed his party's name, Ice Flame. He explained he wielded a flame sword while his wife used ice magic, letting them take on large quests and quickly gain rank. Cain admired Claude's gold card reflecting A-rank status, but Claude downplayed it, mentioning the first king's legendary triple S rank. Suddenly, a wand struck Claude's head, and his wife, Rena, scolded him for drinking. Claude introduced her to Cain, and Rena thought Cain was adorable. She offered to handle troublemakers, but Claude said Cain was capable himself. Annoyed, Rena dragged Claude away by the ear, leaving Cain amused. Cain pondered what quest to undertake with his G-rank status. Transporting items using his inventory seemed dull. Instead, he spotted a quest to defeat as many goblins as possible, with no upper reward limit. Excited, he accepted the quest and ran from the guild, only to be stopped by Tefana, who had finally caught up. She asked what he was doing, and Cain explained he was embarking on his first adventure. Tefana decided to abandon her previous plans and accompany him, despite Cain's attempts to evade her. Deep in the forest, Tefana delighted in the scenery, happy to spend time with Cain. Cain used his search ability to locate goblins ahead. Tefana eagerly rushed forward, asking Cain to follow. When they arrived, a civilian was in danger. Cain quickly cast a healing spell, while Tefana charged the goblins, dispatching them with ease. A larger group appeared, and Cain used magic to bolster Tefana's physical prowess. She thanked him and fought fiercely, vowing to stay by his side. Cain thought Tefana was a bit wild but let her handle the goblins. Meanwhile, a group of green lizards emerged. Cain told Tefana he would handle them while she fled with the civilian. Cain wielded his light and ice magic to swiftly eliminate the lizards. Tefana praised him as the best husband ever. Later, Millie and Nina discovered a large crater where the green lizards had resided, feeling a sense of déjà vu. Back at the guild, Cain informed Rasha that he had defeated the green lizards and inquired if he could still receive the reward despite not officially claiming the quest. Rasha was astonished, as defeating a band of green lizards typically amounted to only a C-rank task. Cain explained he had slain about 30 of the creatures. Rasha hurried to inform the guild chief, Cedric, who introduced himself to Cain and questioned how a G-rank adventurer could have overcome the lizards. Cedric accused Cain of cheating, but Cain insisted otherwise. Cedric confronted Cain with skepticism, alleging that a G-rank adventurer's victory over green lizards was improbable and suspicious. Cain firmly denied any wrongdoing. Despite the accusation, Cain's confidence remained unshaken. As the confrontation with Cedric unfolded, Cain maintained composure, explaining that his superior skills and divine blessings enabled him to defeat creatures far beyond typical expectations for his rank. The guild chief, though initially doubtful, began to reconsider his stance upon witnessing Cain's unwavering resolve and evidence of his powers. Realizing Cain's extraordinary abilities, Cedric reluctantly accepted the situation and suggested Cain consider joining the guild's elite forces. Encouraged by this, Cain looked forward to new challenges and adventures. With the backing of the guild chief, Cain's reputation began to grow swiftly among adventurers. Embracing his new role, Cain trained vigorously under seasoned adventurers. His skills flourished further, blending the divine blessings and years of dedication. He faced tougher beasts and stronger foes, forging a path toward legendary status. As Cain's fame spread, he attracted allies and rivals alike. His growing influence stirred intrigue across the kingdom. Yet, his heart remained steadfast in protecting his loved ones and fulfilling his destiny as the god's chosen. At every turn, Cain's journey blended trials and triumphs. From humble beginnings to noble acclaim, he embraced the burdens and blessings granted by fate. His legacy was only beginning, a tale destined to echo through ages. Cain's path forward was luminous yet fraught with challenges. Each step witnessed the growth of a once ordinary boy into a beacon of hope and strength. His name became synonymous with courage, wisdom, and unyielding resolve. Surrounded by friends, mentors, and cherished companions, Cain cultivated bonds that enriched his journey. Together, they faced perilous quests, unraveling mysteries, and forging alliances to protect their realm. Amidst the grandeur and conflict, Cain never lost sight of his original heart: to live a fulfilling life with family, wield his powers to safeguard others, and find joy amid struggles. The seven gods watched fondly, their blessings evident in Cain's every deed. Thus culminates the tale of Cain von Silford, once a solitary soul cast into another world, now a legendary figure, empowered by divine favor, fearless in battle, and bound by love. His story continues forward, an epic yet unfolding,